Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Connor O'Brien, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in November 2018, and I'm still not sure how to make sense of it all. But I need to get this story out there, because what I experienced in those woods changed me in ways I never thought possible. I was finishing my morning equipment check when my radio crackled to life. Ranger O'Brien, we need you at the Hoh River Trail parking area. Priority 1. Sarah's voice carried that edge it only got when something was seriously wrong. Copy, dispatch, ETA 15 minutes. I grabbed my pack, 43 pounds of search and rescue gear, first aid kit, GPS unit, emergency shelter, and enough water for 2 days. My boots, well-worn Danners with over 3,000 trail miles on them, felt solid against the wet asphalt as I jogged to my truck. The drive to the Hoh River trailhead took me through some of the most beautiful temperate rainforest in the world. Sitka spruces towered 300 feet above the moss-draped understory, their trunks disappearing into the perpetual mist that made Olympic National Park feel like another world entirely. But that morning, something felt different. The Douglas firs seemed to lean inward, creating shadows that moved wrong. The usual bird calls, varied thrushes, winter wrens, Steller's jays, were completely absent. I pulled into the parking area to find 2 Clallam County Sheriff's deputies standing beside a blue Honda Civic, license plate visible through my windshield. Washington 583 KMN. One of the deputies, a tall woman with graying hair, waved me over. Deputy Martinez, she introduced herself, extending her hand. We got a call about a missing hiker, Austin Davis, 22 years old, from Tacoma. His girlfriend says he was supposed to return yesterday evening. When did he leave? Day before yesterday, around noon. Said he was planning to hike the Hoh River Trail, maybe camp at 5 Mile Island. Martinez pulled out her notebook. Here's the strange part, Ranger O'Brien. We found something about an hour ago that doesn't make any sense. She led me to a massive fallen cedar, easily 8 feet in diameter, that had been lying across the trail entrance for at least 5 years. I'd climbed over it hundreds of times myself. The bark was covered in thick moss and the center had rotted out to create a natural tunnel that most hikers crawled through. We found this inside the hollow. Martinez held up a clear evidence bag containing a red North Face baseball cap. The fabric was completely dry despite the constant moisture that never left this part of the rainforest. My throat constricted as if someone had wrapped their hands around my neck. That's impossible. Why? Because that log has been sealed shut for months. There was a windstorm back in August that brought down a huge branch. I pointed to the obvious obstruction, a thick limb that had wedged itself across the hollow opening, creating an impenetrable barrier. No one could have gotten anything inside there since late summer. Martinez and I stared at the evidence bag in silence. Austin's cap was not only dry, it looked freshly placed. No dust, no spider webs, no sign it had been trapped in that hollow for months. There's something else, Martinez said. The girlfriend mentioned Austin was acting strange the past few weeks. Said he kept talking about seeing a woman in white outside their apartment at night. Always in his peripheral vision, never there when he looked directly. The words hit me like ice water thrown in my face. Not because I didn't believe in such things. 12 years in these forests had taught me there were phenomena that couldn't be explained by standard scientific methods. But because 3 other hikers had reported similar sightings over the past 2 months. All 3 reports had been filed and forgotten, dismissed as imagination or fatigue. I radioed for additional support and began organizing the search. By noon, we had 6 volunteers from Clallam County Search and Rescue, 2 more deputies, and my supervisor, Ranger Michelle Santos, coordinating from base camp. The plan was straightforward. Teams of 2 would cover different sections of the trail system, maintaining radio contact every 30 minutes. I paired with Deputy Martinez and took the main Hoh River Trail. The path wound through old-growth forest so dense that full daylight filtered down to create a perpetual twilight. Our boots squelched in the perpetually damp earth, and the air smelled of decomposing cedar and Devil's Club. Ranger O'Brien to base, we're at mile marker 3, no sign of the subject. I clipped the radio back to my belt and checked my GPS unit. 47.8606 degran, 123.93, 8 degran W. That's when Martinez grabbed my arm. Do you hear that? I stopped walking and listened. Through the constant drip of condensation and the distant sound of the river, I could make out something else. A woman's voice, singing. The melody was beautiful but somehow wrong, like a lullaby played in a minor key. Base, this is O'Brien. We're hearing vocalizations approximately half a mile east of mile marker 3. Investigating. We left the main trail and pushed through the undergrowth, following the sound. Salmonberry bushes caught at our clothing, and I had to duck under low-hanging hemlock branches. The singing grew clearer as we moved deeper into the forest. The voice was coming from a small clearing where someone had built a crude camp. A blue two-person tent, partially collapsed, sat beside the cold remains of a campfire. Austin's camping gear was scattered around the site as if he'd left in a hurry, but the singing was coming from the opposite side of the clearing where the forest grew thick again. "Austin Davis," I called out. "This is Ranger O'Brien with the National Park Service." The singing stopped immediately. Martinez was examining the campsite. His sleeping bag is still here. Wallet's in the tent with all his cash and credit cards. Whatever happened, he left everything behind. I was about to respond when I saw her. A woman in a white dress stood between two massive cedar trees about 50 yards away. Even from that distance, I could see she was beautiful. Long, dark hair, pale skin that seemed to glow against the deep shadows of the forest. But something was wrong with the way she stood. Too still. Too perfect. "Do you see her?" I whispered to Martinez. "See who?" When I looked again, the woman was gone. We spent another hour searching the area around Austin's campsite, but found no additional clues. The singing didn't return. As we prepared to head back to the main trail, Martinez discovered something that made my stomach drop. "O'Brien, look at this." She was kneeling beside a Douglas fir with bark scarred by what looked like claw marks, but these weren't from any animal I'd ever seen. The gouges were too deep, too precisely spaced, and they were fresh. Sap still beaded along the wounds. "What kind of animal could do this?" Martinez asked. I couldn't answer because my attention was focused on something else entirely. Carved into the bark just below the claw marks, in letters so faint they were barely visible, was a single word: help. The rest of the afternoon blurred together. We called in additional teams, expanded the search radius, and set up a base camp at Austin's site. But as evening approached, I found myself walking back to that scarred Douglas fir again and again. Each time I returned, the carved word seemed deeper, more distinct. And I started noticing other things. The way shadows fell in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The complete absence of any wildlife sounds. The fact that my compass needle couldn't hold steady, spinning slowly but persistently counterclockwise. By the time we called off the search for the day, I had documented 17 separate anomalies in my incident report. 17 things that couldn't be explained by standard Park Service protocols. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of the uncomfortable cot in the ranger station, but because every time I closed my eyes I saw that woman in white standing between the cedar trees, and I heard her singing that beautiful wrong melody. Around 3 a.m. my radio crackled. "Base camp to all units. We have a situation." I grabbed the handset. "O'Brien here. This is Martinez. I'm at Austin's campsite. You need to get down here immediately." The drive to the trailhead took 25 minutes in the darkness. I kept my high beams on and drove faster than I should have on the winding forest road. When I reached the Hoh River Trail, I could see Martinez's flashlight beam cutting through the trees about a mile ahead. I hiked the distance in 15 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs not from exertion, but from something else. A growing certainty that whatever was happening in these woods was far beyond anything I'd encountered in 12 years of ranger work. Martinez was standing in Austin's campsite, her service weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. Her face was white as bone in the beam of my headlamp. "What's the situation?" I asked. "The tent," she said. "Look at the tent." Austin's blue camping tent, which had been partially collapsed when we left that evening, was now fully erected. The rain fly was properly secured, the guy lines tight, and there was a soft glow coming from inside as if someone had lit a lantern. "Did anyone else come back here after we left?" I asked. Martinez shook her head. "I've been monitoring all radio traffic. No one was authorized to return to this location." We approached the tent carefully. I could hear something inside, a soft rustling, like someone moving around in a sleeping bag. My hand moved instinctively to the can of bear spray on my belt. "Austin?" I called out. "This is Ranger O'Brien. Are you in there?" The rustling stopped. Martinez positioned herself on one side of the tent entrance while I approached from the other. With one quick motion, I unzipped the rain fly and pulled back the tent flap. The tent was empty, but it wasn't just empty. It was perfectly arranged. Sleeping bag laid out flat, pillow positioned at the head, a battery-powered lantern glowing softly in the corner, as if someone had just prepared the space for occupation. "This is impossible," Martinez whispered. "I was here 30 minutes ago." The tent was collapsed. Everything was scattered. That's when I heard the singing again. This time it was coming from directly above us. I tilted my head back and played my flashlight beam up into the canopy of the Douglas fir that towered over the campsite. She was there, sitting on a branch 60 feet off the ground, her white dress hanging down like a waterfall. Her long dark hair moved in a breeze that I couldn't feel at ground level, and she was looking directly at me. "Do you see her now?" I asked Martinez. Martinez followed my flashlight beam and gasped. "How did she get up there? There's no way to climb that tree." The woman in white smiled at us. Even from that distance, I could see her teeth were perfectly white, perfectly straight. And when she opened her mouth to continue singing, I realized with absolute certainty that this wasn't a human being. Because the sound that came out of her mouth wasn't just singing. It was Austin's voice, calling for help. His exact voice, with the same inflection his girlfriend had described when she filed the missing person report. "Help me," the woman sang in Austin's voice. "I'm lost. I can't find my way back." Martinez raised her weapon. "Ma'am, you need to come down from there immediately." The woman tilted her head, still smiling, and spoke in a voice that was definitely not Austin's. It was beautiful and musical, but completely wrong, like hearing a symphony played on instruments that didn't exist. "Connor O'Brien," she said. "You have such a lovely family. Emma is 7 now, isn't she? And little Michael just turned 4. My breath stopped moving in and out of my lungs entirely. My peripheral vision disappeared, narrowing to a tunnel focused only on that pale face 60 feet above me. Nobody knew my children's names. Nobody knew their ages. I hadn't mentioned my family to anyone on this search operation. "How do you know that?" I managed to ask. "I know many things," the woman replied, her voice like wind chimes made of ice. "I know that Emma lost her first tooth last month. I know that Michael still sleeps with his stuffed dinosaur. I know that your wife Sarah makes pancakes every Sunday morning, and that you always steal a bite from Emma's plate because she puts extra syrup on hers." Each detail hit me like a physical blow. These weren't things you could learn from public records or social media. These were intimate family moments, private knowledge that existed only in my own memory and the memories of my wife and children. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want what I've always wanted," she said. "I want my children back." That's when I understood. This wasn't just some random supernatural encounter. This was about loss, about a mother's grief so powerful it had transcended death itself. The woman in white wasn't just a vengeful spirit. She was a woman who had lost everything, and now she was trying to reclaim what was taken from her. "Where is Austin Davis?" I demanded. "Austin is safe," she said. "He's with my children now. They've been so lonely." Martinez whispered urgently into her radio. "Base camp, this is Martinez. We need immediate backup at Austin's campsite. We have a situation." The woman in white laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking underwater. "Your technology won't work here, Deputy Martinez, not in my place." I looked at Martinez's radio. The LED display was dark, completely dead despite fresh batteries. Connor, the woman continued, you understand what I'm offering, don't you? I'm not asking you to give me your children, I'm asking you to bring them here where they'll be safe, where they'll never grow old, never get hurt, never leave you. The offer hung in the air between us like a poisonous flower, because part of me, a small dark part that I'd never acknowledged before, understood exactly what she meant. Every parent has moments of terror, moments when you realize how fragile your children are, how easily they could be taken from you. Car accidents, illness, violence, the 1,000 random dangers that lurk in ordinary life. What if there was a way to protect them from all of that? What if there was a place where they could be safe forever? No, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Think about it, Connor. Emma is getting older. Soon she won't want to spend Sunday mornings making pancakes with Daddy. Soon she'll be more interested in her friends than her family. Michael will grow up, move away, start his own life. Is that what you want? To lose them a little bit more each day? The woman's voice was hypnotic, seductive, and everything she said was true. Children grow up, they leave, they build lives that don't revolve around their parents. It's natural and healthy and completely heartbreaking. But that's when I remembered why I became a ranger in the first place. It wasn't for the paycheck or the benefits or the opportunity to work outdoors. It was because I wanted to protect things. I wanted to preserve something beautiful and wild for future generations, including my own children. I wanted Emma and Michael to grow up in a world where they could experience the same sense of wonder I felt every time I walked into old-growth forest. You're not offering to protect them, I said, and my voice was steady again. You're offering to steal their futures. The woman's smile faded. You don't understand what you're refusing. Yes, I do. I looked up at her pale face and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. I understand exactly what you're offering, and I understand why. You lost your children, and that loss drove you insane. But taking other people's children won't bring yours back. You know nothing about loss, she screamed, and her voice was no longer beautiful. It was the sound of breaking glass, of wind howling through empty houses, of everything beautiful being torn apart. The Douglas fir began to shake, and I could hear branches cracking 60 feet above our heads. Martinez grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away from the tree, but I stood my ground. I know enough, I called up to her. I know that love means letting people grow and change and make their own choices. I know that trying to keep someone safe by trapping them isn't love at all. That's when the woman in white made her mistake. She dropped down from the tree, not climbed down, not repelled. She simply stepped off the branch and fell 60 feet, landing softly in front of us as if gravity had no power over her. Up close, I could see that her white dress was a wedding gown, beautiful and intricate but stained with mud and moss. Her skin had the pale, translucent quality of someone who had been underwater for a very long time, and her eyes were completely black. Give me your children, she whispered, reaching toward me with fingers that were too long, too pale. That's when I did something that surprised both of us. I stepped forward and took her hands in mine. Her skin was ice cold, and I could feel power running through her like electricity through a wire, but I didn't let go. I can't give you my children, I said, but I can give you something else. What? I can give you the truth. Your children are gone, and they're not coming back. Austin Davis is gone too, isn't he? You killed him because you thought it would fill the emptiness inside you, but it didn't work. It just made the emptiness bigger. The woman in white tried to pull her hands away, but I held on. Not with physical strength. I could never have overpowered a supernatural entity, but with something else. With the absolute certainty that I was right. You can keep killing people, I continued. You can keep stealing hikers and campers and anyone else who wanders into your territory, but it will never bring your children back. It will just add more loss to the world. Stop, she whispered. Or you can choose to let go. You can choose to move on to wherever it is that mothers go when they die. You can choose to be with your children again, really with them, instead of trying to replace them with other people's children. The woman in white stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something change in those black eyes. The rage faded, replaced by something infinitely sadder. "I just miss them so much," she said, and now her voice sounded human again. Broken, but human. "I know," I said. "And that's okay. Missing them means you love them. But this isn't love anymore. This is just pain, and you're spreading it to other families." She nodded slowly, and I felt the supernatural power drain out of her like water flowing out of a broken dam. She became lighter, more translucent, until I could see the trees behind her through her white dress. Will you make sure Austin gets home to his family?" she asked. "Where is he?" "Follow the river upstream. 2 miles past 5 Mile Island, you'll find a cave behind a waterfall. He's there. He's sleeping, but he's alive." With that, the woman in white faded away entirely, leaving Martinez and me standing alone in Austin's campsite. We found Austin exactly where she had said we would. He was unconscious, but alive, suffering from severe dehydration and hypothermia. The paramedics said later that he wouldn't have survived another day. Austin recovered fully, but he had no memory of what happened after he left his campsite. The doctors attributed his memory loss to trauma and exposure. I never told him about the woman in white, and I never included her in my official report. Some truths are too big for paperwork. What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. I went back to the scarred Douglas fir one more time before we closed the case. The claw marks were gone, and so was the carved word, "help." The tree looked completely normal, just another giant in a forest full of giants. But I learned something important during those 2 days in the woods. I learned that love isn't about holding on to people so tightly that they can't grow or change or make their own mistakes. Love is about giving people roots strong enough to support them and wings strong enough to carry them wherever they need to go. Every Sunday morning, I still steal bites from Emma's extra syrupy pancakes, and every Sunday morning I'm grateful that she's growing up in a world where she'll have the freedom to make her own choices, even when those choices take her away from me. Because that's what it means to be a parent, and that's what it means to love someone enough to let them go. I still work as a ranger at Olympic National Park. I still lead search and rescue operations, and I still encounter phenomena that can't be explained by standard scientific methods. But I've never again met anything as powerful as a mother's love twisted into something dark and consuming. The forest is full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But the most dangerous thing you can encounter out there isn't a supernatural entity or a wild animal. It's your own inability to let go of the people you love. Did you enjoy this supernatural encounter? What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales from the wilderness. My name is Mason Campbell, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. My grandfather started this legacy in 1962. My father continued it, and now it's my turn to protect these 922,000 acres of Washington wilderness. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2018, and it changed everything I thought I knew about the forest that raised me. The morning started like any other Tuesday. I was checking my gear at the Salt Duke Ranger Station. Motorola APX 6000 radio, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency beacon, and the worn leather boots my father had passed down. The familiar weight of the duty belt around my waist, the scratchy wool of my regulation jacket against my forearms, the metallic taste of too much coffee from the station pot. All routine. Then Deputy Martinez from the Clallam County Sheriff's Office walked in, holding something that made my coffee taste like copper pennies. "Mason, we need your help with a missing hiker," she said, extending a clear evidence bag. Inside was a smartphone with a cracked screen, the case bright pink with a small unicorn sticker. "Belongs to Mia Johnson, 22, from Seattle. Been missing since Sunday." I took the bag, feeling the slight warmth still radiating from the device through the plastic. "Where'd you find it?" "That's the problem." Martinez rubbed her temples, leaving small red marks where her fingers pressed. "We found it on top of the Hot Springs Loop trail marker. Not dropped nearby, not fallen from a backpack. Sitting perfectly centered on the wooden post, like someone placed it there deliberately." My peripheral vision seemed to narrow to just the phone. The Hot Springs Loop was 8 miles from the main trail where Mia was last seen, but more importantly, that trail marker stood 12 feet tall. No hiker could reach the top without serious climbing equipment. Impossible, I whispered, though my grandfather's voice echoed somewhere in my mind. He used to say the forest had its own rules, especially in the old sections where loggers never cut, where indigenous peoples had left their own stories carved in cedar bark. Gets stranger, Martinez continued. Phone was bone dry, but it rained Sunday night. Heavy. Everything else on that trail was soaked through. The radio on my belt crackled. Dispatch to Ranger Campbell, code 30, Saul Duke Valley, GPS coordinates 479505, 123.8347. Missing hiker search and rescue requested. I pressed the transmit button, feeling the rough texture of the rubberized surface. Ranger Campbell, 10-4, en route to coordinates, but something cold was already spreading through my chest, like ice water seeping through wool. The coordinates Martinez gave me were for the same location where they found Mia's phone. Standard protocol would have us searching the area where she was last seen, not 8 miles away at an impossible location. As I loaded my pack into the Chevy Tahoe, the October air carried scents that felt wrong. Too much decomposition for the season, like something large had died recently and been disturbed. Pine sap that seemed sharper than usual, almost acidic, making my sinuses burn. The drive to the coordinates took 45 minutes on increasingly narrow Forest Service roads. My radio filled with static as I got deeper into the valley, the kind that comes before electrical storms, though the sky was that peculiar gray-white that meant snow was coming. I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack. 47 pounds of search and rescue gear, the weight familiar across my shoulders after years of carrying it. The first 100 yards of trail looked normal. Douglas fir towering overhead, sword ferns creating green walls on both sides, the loamy earth soft under my boots. Then I reached the trail marker. The wooden post stood exactly where it should, but something was off about the angles. The shadows fell wrong, as if the sun was shining from 2 different directions simultaneously. When I looked directly at the top of the marker, my eyes wanted to slide away, like trying to focus on something at the edge of your vision. I radioed dispatch. Ranger Campbell at coordinates. Beginning systematic search pattern, starting 30 meters north of marker. The response came back full of static. Copy that. Campbell. Conditions. Zist. Report every. Standard search protocol meant expanding outward in concentric circles, looking for signs of passage. Broken vegetation, disturbed soil, fabric caught on branches, any indication of human presence. I've done this hundreds of times. My boots knew how to read the forest floor, where to step to move quietly, how to distinguish between deer trails and human paths. But every step felt like walking through invisible spider webs. The sensation of being watched pressed against the back of my neck like a cold hand. 3 times I spun around, certain I'd heard footsteps matching my pace, but found only empty forest. The decomposition smell was getting stronger. Not the clean decay of autumn leaves, but something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in summer heat. I followed it deeper into the trees, away from the marked trail, my hand instinctively checking the pepper spray on my duty belt. That's when I found the first sign. A piece of blue fabric, maybe 2 inches square, hung from a salmonberry bush about 6 feet off the ground. Too high for a hiker to catch clothing accidentally, but perfect height for someone to place it deliberately. Like a breadcrumb trail. My radio crackled. All units. Be advised. ZIT. Reports of possible structure. ZIT. Exercise caution. Structure? I keyed the mic. Dispatch Ranger Campbell requesting clarification on structure report. Only static answered. The fabric led me west toward an area I knew was off limits to hikers. Too many steep ravines and unstable soil conditions. My grandfather had told me stories about this section, warnings about places where the ground could give way without warning, where hunters had disappeared in the 1970s. But as I pushed through increasingly thick underbrush, my boots began to encounter something unexpected. Packed earth. Not the natural compression of deer trails, but soil that had been deliberately tamped down, like someone had created a hidden path through terrain that should have been impassable. The trees grew strange here too. Ancient cedars twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, their bark scarred with marks that could have been lightning damage or something else entirely. The canopy blocked most of the afternoon light, leaving everything in premature twilight. Another piece of fabric, this time caught on a branch at exactly eye level, as if placed there specifically for me to find. The blue material matched the description of the jacket Mia Johnson was wearing when she disappeared. My breathing had become shallow, each inhalation carrying that sweet, sick decomposition smell mixed with something metallic. The muscles in my shoulders had drawn up until they nearly touched my ears, and my fingers had gone numb despite the mild October temperature. Following the fabric trail, I discovered something that shouldn't have existed. A clearing, perfectly circular, about 30 feet across. The earth was bare except for fallen leaves, and in the center sat a single object, Mia Johnson's backpack. But like the phone, it was positioned too deliberately. Centered exactly, straps arranged symmetrically, not a single leaf or piece of debris touching it despite being in the middle of the forest for 3 days. I approached slowly, every instinct my father had taught me screaming warnings. Never assume you're alone in the woods, he used to say, and never assume what you're seeing is natural. The backpack was undamaged but empty. No supplies, no personal items, nothing except a lingerie receipt from a Seattle store dated 3 days ago. Like someone had removed everything useful and left only a message, "I have her and I want you to know it." That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in any forest. The mechanical whir of something electronic, coming from somewhere beneath my feet. I knelt and pressed my ear to the ground. Through 6 inches of soil and decomposed organic matter, I could hear the faint hum of ventilation fans and what might have been fluorescent lighting. Someone had built something under this clearing. My radio burst to life with clear reception for the first time in an hour. "This is exactly where I want you, Ranger Campbell." The voice was calm, educated, with the flat affect of someone completely disconnected from normal human emotion. Not a voice that should have been coming through Park Service radio frequencies. "My grandfather told me stories about your family," the voice continued. "3 generations of forest rangers, all very dedicated to protecting people in these woods. I've been waiting to meet a Campbell for quite some time." I fumbled for my radio, hands shaking enough to make the equipment rattle against my belt. "Identify yourself. You're using an emergency frequency illegally." "Oh, but this is an emergency, Mason. May I call you Mason?" "Mia Johnson is approximately 40 feet below where you're standing, and she has about 6 hours of air left in her current accommodations." The world seemed to tilt. I looked around the clearing with new eyes, understanding that I was standing on the roof of something much larger and more complex than a simple underground shelter. "What do you want?" "I want to play a game with someone who actually knows these woods. Do you know how many hikers have disappeared in Olympic National Park over the past 15 years? The official number is 11. The actual number is 37. I've been very, very patient, waiting for the right opponent." Static filled the radio for several seconds before the voice returned. "There are 5 entrance points to my facility. Each one is protected by obstacles. Some are mechanical, some are more creative. Find the right entrance, navigate my little challenges, and you can save Miss Johnson. Choose wrong or take too long and she joins my collection." My mouth had gone completely dry, that copper taste spreading across my tongue. "You're insane. I'm methodical. And I'm giving you something 36 other people didn't get. A chance to earn their freedom. Your family's reputation for finding lost hikers preceded you." The radio went silent except for the normal static of forest interference. I stared at the backpack in the center of the clearing, understanding now that it was positioned to mark the center of whatever lay beneath. 40 feet down, in some kind of underground complex, built in the heart of protected federal land, Mia Johnson was running out of air, while a madman waited to see if I was clever enough to save her. What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or call for backup? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. But I already knew what my grandfather would have done, what my father would have done. A Campbell doesn't abandon someone in the forest no matter what the cost. The badge on my uniform meant something, and the trees that had raised me were counting on me to prove worthy of the family name. I began walking the perimeter of the clearing, looking for any sign of the entrance points the voice had mentioned. If there were 5 ways in, logic suggested they'd be positioned at regular intervals around the circumference. The first entrance revealed itself as a depression in the ground about 20 feet from the clearing's edge, concealed by carefully arranged ferns and fallen logs. When I cleared away the vegetation, I found a steel hatch built flush with the earth, painted forest colors to blend perfectly with the environment. A professional job, military quality. The hatch was unlocked, but as I lifted it, I could see why. The entrance shaft dropped straight down about 12 feet, with metal rungs built into one wall for climbing. At the bottom, barely visible in the dim light filtering down, was a floor covered in what looked like broken glass. The second entrance, 90 degrees around the clearing, was more elaborate. Hidden beneath an artificial boulder made of fiberglass and forest debris, I found another hatch. This one opened to reveal a sloped tunnel heading downward, with what appeared to be tripwires strung across the passage at ankle height. Each entrance, I discovered, was a variation on the same theme: accessible, but designed to injure or kill anyone who chose incorrectly. This wasn't the work of someone who had snapped recently. This was infrastructure that had been planned and constructed over years by someone with significant resources and a deep understanding of how search and rescue operations worked. The fifth entrance, hidden beneath what I had initially taken for a natural depression created by an uprooted tree, was different. The hatch was identical to the others, but when I opened it, I found a simple ladder descending to what looked like a normally lit corridor. No obvious traps, no broken glass, no tripwires. Too easy, which meant it was either the correct choice or the deadliest trap of all. My radio crackled. "Tick-tock, Ranger Campbell. Miss Johnson's oxygen is dropping into the danger zone." I clipped my radio to my jacket where I could reach it easily, checked that my flashlight was secured, and started down the ladder. If this was a trap, at least I'd discover what I was dealing with. If it was the correct entrance, I was that much closer to saving Mia. The ladder descended about 15 feet into a corridor that belonged in an office building, not buried under a forest clearing. Fluorescent lighting, concrete walls painted institutional green, industrial carpeting that muffled my footsteps. The air smelled of disinfectant and that electronic ozone scent that comes from too much electrical equipment in a confined space. 20 feet ahead, the corridor branched into a T intersection. On the wall where the passages met, someone had mounted a digital clock counting backward. 04:47:33, 04:47:32, 04:47:31. Less than 5 hours. My hands were shaking enough now that I had to concentrate to hold my flashlight steady, even though the corridor was well lit. Somewhere in this underground complex, Mia Johnson was trapped in a space with diminishing oxygen while I played a madman's game. I chose the left passage, moving as quickly as I dared while still watching for traps. The construction was sophisticated. This wasn't some crude survivalist bunker, but a facility that had required significant engineering and construction expertise. Whoever had built this had resources, time, and skills that went far beyond what most people could manage. The left passage ended at a heavy steel door marked "Collection Storage." Through a small reinforced window, I could see shelves lined with personal belongings. Backpacks, clothing, camping equipment, wallets, phones, 37 hikers' worth of possessions, organized and cataloged like museum exhibits. The sight made my legs feel like water. I had to lean against the concrete wall to keep from falling, the rough texture scraping against my palm. Each item on those shelves represented someone who had walked into the forest and never walked out, someone whose family was still wondering what happened. But Mia Johnson wasn't storage yet. She was still alive, still depending on me to find her before her air ran out. I backtracked to the T intersection and tried the right passage. This corridor was longer, with several doors branching off on both sides. The first few were locked, but I could hear machinery running behind them. Generators, ventilation equipment, the infrastructure keeping this place operational. The fourth door was unlocked. Inside, I found what could only be described as a control room. Multiple monitors showing camera feeds from throughout the forest. Radio equipment sophisticated enough to monitor and broadcast on Park Service frequencies, and detailed maps of Olympic National Park with dozens of locations marked in red. On one monitor, I could see myself standing in the doorway, filmed by a camera I hadn't noticed in the corridor ceiling. On another screen, a young woman with dark hair sat in what looked like a concrete cell, her breathing rapid and shallow. Mia Johnson, alive, but clearly in distress. A microphone sat on the control desk, its base marked with the same radio frequency my service radio used. I keyed it. "I found your control room. Where is she?" The response came immediately, both through the radio speaker and from somewhere deeper in the facility. "Impressive. You're moving faster than I expected, but you're not at the finish line yet." On the monitor showing Mia, I could see a digital readout in the corner of the screen. O2, 11.7%. Dangerously low, but not immediately fatal. Yet. "She's in sub-basement level 2, the voice continued, "but there's still the matter of getting there safely. Did you really think I'd make it that easy?" The monitor feeds showed me something that made my stomach drop. The corridor I'd just walked through was now sealed at both ends by steel barriers that had dropped from the ceiling. I was trapped in this section of the facility. But as I turned to leave the control room, I noticed something the voice hadn't mentioned. A ventilation grate in the corner, large enough for a person to crawl through if they were determined enough. The building plans displayed on one monitor showed the ventilation system running throughout the facility. If I could navigate the ductwork, I might be able to reach the sub-basement level without using whatever trapped route he'd prepared for me. I pried open the ventilation grate using my multi-tool, the metal screaming against metal as the screws gave way. The opening was tight, but manageable for someone who'd spent years crawling through wilderness terrain. The hardest part would be moving quietly enough that he wouldn't realize what I was doing. Inside the ductwork, I could hear everything. The hum of electrical equipment, the whisper of air circulation, and somewhere below me, the sound of someone crying. Mia was alive. She was scared, and she was close. The ventilation shaft sloped downward, leading me toward the sub-basement level. Through grates along the way, I could see corridors and rooms that looked like a combination of laboratory and prison. This wasn't just a place where someone had hidden after committing crimes. This was a facility designed for long-term imprisonment and whatever else happened to the 36 people whose belongings I'd seen in storage. The shaft ended at another grate, this one looking down into what was clearly the cell where Mia was being held. She sat on a concrete bench, her breathing labored but steady, her eyes focused on the door as if she expected rescue to come from that direction. I worked at the grate screws as quietly as possible, my multi-tool slipping several times on the worn metal. Each small noise seemed amplified in the confined space, and I kept expecting alarms to sound or the voice to return, warning me away. When the grate finally came free, I lowered it carefully into the cell and dropped down beside Mia Johnson. She looked up with eyes that had seen too much, but when she recognized the ranger uniform, some of the tension left her shoulders. "Are you real?" she whispered. "I'm real. Mason Campbell, Olympic National Park, we're going to get you out of here." But as I helped her to her feet, testing her strength and mobility, the voice returned over hidden speakers. "Very clever, Ranger Campbell, but you've triggered the final phase of our game." The cell door, which had been solid steel, suddenly became transparent from our side, one-way glass that let us see into the corridor beyond. And standing there, wearing a ranger uniform identical to mine, was a man I'd never seen before. "Meet my associate," the voice continued. "He's been looking forward to this moment almost as much as I have." The man in the corridor was tall, lean, with the kind of build that comes from years of physical work outdoors. His uniform was perfect, down to the worn leather of his duty belt and the faded patches on his jacket sleeves. If I'd seen him at any ranger station in the country, I wouldn't have questioned his authenticity. But his eyes were wrong, completely empty of the connection to the natural world that every real forest ranger develops. These were the eyes of someone who saw trees as obstacles and wildlife as targets. "You see, Mason," the voice explained, I've been studying your profession for quite some time, learning how rangers think, how they move through the forest, what protocols they follow. My associate here has been practicing being you." The false ranger began unlocking the cell door, moving with the confident efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "After today, there will be no search for Mia Johnson, because Ranger Mason Campbell will file a report stating that she was found safe and returned to her family. The case will be closed, the investigation ended, and I'll continue my work without interference." I looked around the cell desperately, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon or tool. Mia grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd been breathing limited oxygen for hours. "There's another way out," she whispered so quietly I could barely hear her. "Maintenance tunnel behind that panel. He doesn't know I found it." She pointed to a section of the concrete wall that looked identical to every other section, but when I examined it closely, I could see the faint outline of an access panel, painted to match the wall color. The false ranger had finished with the locks. In seconds, he'd be inside the cell, and whatever plan involved replacing me would move forward. 37 people had already died because of this madman's games, and if I failed now, Mia and I would join that number. I pried open the hidden panel with my multi-tool, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel barely wide enough for one person. Emergency lighting strips showed that it extended beyond the reach of my flashlight. "Go," I told Mia, boosting her up into the opening. "Follow the tunnel until you find a way up to ground level." "What about you?" The cell door was opening. I could hear the false ranger's boots on the concrete floor. Someone needs to make sure this place never traps anyone else. As Mia disappeared into the maintenance tunnel, I turned to face the man who'd been planning to wear my identity like a costume. He carried a tranquilizer gun, the kind used for wildlife management, but his finger was already on the trigger. "You've been more entertaining than most," he said, his voice the same flat, emotionless tone I'd heard over the radio. "But this is where the game ends." Instead of backing away, I stepped toward him, using the cell's narrow space to limit his mobility. The tranquilizer gun was effective at range, but in close quarters, my years of wilderness survival training gave me advantages he hadn't anticipated. We fought in the confined space of the concrete cell, him trying to bring the gun to bear, me working to get inside his reach where he couldn't use it effectively. His ranger uniform was perfect camouflage, but he moved like someone who'd learned to fight in gyms. Not in forests where every step had to be calculated and every motion served multiple purposes. I got the gun away from him, but he was stronger than his lean build suggested, and he fought with the desperate fury of someone protecting years of careful planning. The struggle carried us out of the cell and into the corridor, where I could see the full scope of what he'd built. Dozens of cells, each one equipped with its own life support system and monitoring equipment. A laboratory area with equipment I didn't want to think about. Storage rooms full of supplies that suggested this operation was designed to continue for decades. But I also saw something he probably hadn't intended me to notice. Structural supports that looked like they'd been installed incorrectly. Load-bearing beams that showed stress fractures. Electrical systems that were overloaded beyond safety margins. This place had been built quickly and in secret, without proper engineering oversight. It was a disaster waiting to happen. During our fight, I'd managed to reach the radio on my duty belt. I keyed the emergency beacon, hoping that somewhere above ground a signal was getting through to other rangers, to the sheriff's office, to someone who could bring help. But more importantly, I'd reached the main electrical panel for this section of the facility. "You want to know the difference between a real forest ranger and someone pretending to be one?" I asked, breathing hard as we grappled for control of the tranquilizer gun. "A real ranger knows that sometimes you have to sacrifice something precious to protect something more important." I yanked the main electrical breaker. The lights went out, the ventilation stopped, and somewhere in the darkness, emergency systems began to fail. This place had been someone's life work, but it was also a tomb for 37 innocent people. It needed to end. In the darkness, I could hear him moving, trying to reach backup systems or emergency lighting. But I'd grown up in these forests, learned to navigate by sound and feel and instinct. Darkness was my ally, not my enemy. I found the maintenance tunnel Mia had used and followed it upward through a system of passages that led eventually to a concealed exit point about a quarter-mile from the clearing where I'd started. When I emerged into the October forest, breathing clean air and feeling actual sunlight on my face, I could hear sirens approaching through the trees. Mia Johnson was already there, sitting in the back of an ambulance while paramedics checked her oxygen levels and treated her for exposure. She looked up when she saw me, and for the first time since I'd found her, she smiled. "Did you?" she started to ask. "It's over," I told her. "All of it." Over the next several hours, as federal agents and county deputies secured the underground facility, the full scope of what we'd discovered became clear. 37 missing persons cases spanning 15 years, all connected to one man who'd used the Olympic National Forest as his private hunting ground. Evidence that linked him to disappearances in 3 other national parks. And most importantly, proof that would finally give closure to families who'd been wondering for years what happened to their loved ones. The man himself was found unconscious in the facility's main corridor, overcome by carbon monoxide from the backup generators when the ventilation failed. He survived, but his underground complex didn't. The structural damage from the electrical failure, combined with safety violations discovered during the investigation, meant the entire facility had to be demolished and filled in. They recovered what they could: personal belongings, remains, evidence that helped solve cold cases across the Pacific Northwest. But the forest itself reclaimed that clearing, growing over the scars and returning the land to what it had been before someone tried to turn it into a monument to human cruelty. As for me, I stayed on as a ranger at Olympic National Park. The experience changed how I see the forest. I'm more aware now of the signs that something might be wrong, more willing to trust instincts that my grandfather would have recognized. But I also learned that sometimes the most dangerous predators are human, and that protecting the wilderness means protecting the people who come here seeking peace and beauty. Mia Johnson recovered completely. She sent me a letter 6 months later, telling me she'd started hiking again, though never alone. She said the forest still called to her despite what had happened, and she wasn't going to let one madman's actions take away something she loved. That's probably the best outcome we could have hoped for, that both the forest and the people who love it could heal from what had been done to them. Did you enjoy this supernatural encounter? What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales from the wilderness. The forest holds many secrets, and not all of them are as easy to solve as the case of the Campbell legacy and the bunker that never should have existed. The Olympic National Forest is still there, still beautiful, still calling to people who need to remember what wild places feel like. And 3 generations of Campbells are still there to make sure those people make it home safely. Some traditions are worth preserving, no matter what the cost. My name is Tyler Brooks, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2018, and it's the reason I can finally sleep through the night again after 3 years of waking up in cold sweats, seeing the face of little Annie Morrison every time I closed my eyes. Annie was 8 years old when I lost her in 2015. Search and rescue protocol dictated I should have waited for backup before pursuing her trail into the deeper sections of the Hoh River Valley. But I thought I knew better. By the time we found her body 2 days later, hypothermia had taken her, and it was my fault. Her parents never said it directly, but I saw it in their eyes at the funeral. I saw it in my supervisor's recommendation that I take extended leave. I saw it every morning in the mirror. The call came in at 6:23 a.m. on October 15th, crackling through the static of my Motorola radio as I sat in Ranger Station 7, staring at the incident report I was supposed to be filing. The voice belonged to Carol Johnson, and it shook with the kind of desperation that makes your stomach drop before your brain even processes the words. "Please, you have to help us. My daughter Emily, she went hiking yesterday on the Sol Duke Trail and never came back. We found her car this morning, but there's blood on the driver's side door and her hiking boots are sitting on the roof. What kind of person takes someone's shoes?" I grabbed my gear bag and was in my truck within 3 minutes. The taste of instant coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I radioed dispatch. "Station 7 to base, I'm responding to missing hiker report. Saul Duke area. 23-year-old female Emily Johnson. Last seen yesterday afternoon. The Saul Duke trailhead sits about 15 miles from my station, winding through dense old-growth forest that can swallow voices and footsteps within 30 yards of the main path. As I pulled into the gravel parking area, the smell hit me first. That peculiar combination of Douglas fir sap, morning dew, and something else. Something metallic that made my nostrils flare involuntarily. Emily's Honda Civic sat alone in the lot, and Carol Johnson hadn't exaggerated. Dark stains streaked down the driver's side door, still tacky enough to attract early morning flies. The hiking boots, expensive Merrell trail runners, were positioned precisely on the car's roof, laces tied together. No drag marks, no struggle signs around the vehicle, just blood and boots placed with deliberate care. "Tyler?" A woman's voice called from the tree line. Carol Johnson emerged with her husband Richard, both looking like they'd aged a decade overnight. Carol's eyes were swollen from crying, and Richard's hands trembled as he shook mine. "Tell me about Emily's hiking experience," I said, pulling out my incident notebook and trying to project the confidence I didn't feel. "She's been hiking these trails since she was 12, Richard said. "Knows them better than most locals. She had her GPS, water purification tablets, emergency shelter. She's not reckless." Carol grabbed my arm with fingers that dug in like claws. "Something took her, Mr. Brooks. Emily would never abandon her car like this. And those boots. Why would someone take her boots but leave them here?" I spent the next 2 hours documenting the scene and conducting a preliminary search of the Saul Duke Trail. Emily's GPS coordinates from her Garmin device showed she'd followed the main trail for about 3 miles before the signal cut out abruptly near Beaver Creek. Standard search protocol suggested equipment malfunction, but the placement of those boots nagged at something in my memory. At mile marker 2.8, I found Emily's first trail marker, a granola bar wrapper caught in a salmonberry bush. Not littering. Emily was too conscientious for that. This was deliberate, a breadcrumb for searchers to follow. My boots squelched in the marshy ground near Beaver Creek as I documented the location with my GPS unit. 47.8156 degran, 123.2 degrad W. The second marker appeared 50 yards off the main trail, where someone had broken a Douglas fir branch at eye level, snapping it cleanly but leaving it hanging. The break was fresh, sap still bleeding from the wound in amber droplets that caught the filtered sunlight. But there were no footprints in the soft earth around the tree. None at all. I should have called for backup then. Standard operating procedure required additional personnel for any search extending beyond established trails. But Annie Morrison's face flickered in my mind, and I heard Carol Johnson's desperate voice echoing through the forest canopy. I couldn't lose another one. Following the deliberately broken branches, I pushed deeper into unmarked wilderness. The Douglas firs grew thick enough here to block most of the autumn sunlight, and the air temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. My radio crackled with static when I tried to check in with dispatch, probably interference from the terrain. At 2:47 p.m. I found Emily's water bottle wedged between 2 river stones in a creek bed that wasn't marked on any of my topographical maps. The bottle was empty, but recent. No algae growth, no insect debris inside. Someone had placed it there within the last 24 hours. The creek led me into a narrow canyon I'd never seen in 12 years of patrolling this area. Basalt walls rose about 40 feet on either side, covered in moss that glowed an unnatural shade of green in the dim light. The air smelled wrong here. Not the clean scent of mountain water and fir trees, but something organic and rotting, like meat left too long in summer heat. My boots crunched on something that wasn't fallen leaves or forest debris. Looking down, I saw scattered fragments of what looked like animal bones, but the arrangement was too deliberate, too precise. Small femurs and rib cages formed rough circles in the sandy creek bottom, with larger bones, possibly deer or elk, arranged in patterns that made my vision blur when I tried to focus on them directly. That's when I heard the singing. It drifted down from somewhere above the canyon walls, thin and melodic, but with lyrics in a language I didn't recognize. The harmony was perfect, too perfect for human voices, and it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. My hands started sweating inside my work gloves, and I had to consciously force myself to breathe slowly through my nose. The singing stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of water trickling over stones and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. In the silence, I heard something else, a woman's voice calling for help, faint but unmistakable. Emily. Emily, can you hear me? This is Park Ranger Tyler Brooks, I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Help, please. The response came from directly ahead, where the canyon curved out of sight around a bend lined with dead trees. Trees that should have been thriving in this moist environment, but instead stood like charcoal skeletons with branches reaching toward the narrow strip of sky like desperate fingers. I rounded the bend and stopped dead. The canyon opened into a natural amphitheater about the size of a football field, ringed by basalt cliffs draped with moss and strange flowering vines I'd never seen in Olympic National Park's ecosystem. In the center stood the ruins of what looked like a 19th century settlement. Log buildings with stone foundations, their roofs collapsed and walls leaning at impossible angles. But it was the crosses that made my breathing turn shallow and rapid. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, jutted from the ground at random intervals throughout the ruined settlement. Not wooden crosses, but elaborate metal constructions twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. Some stood 15 feet tall, others barely reached my waist, and each one was decorated with ornaments. Skulls. Human skulls, their empty sockets facing the center of the amphitheater like an audience waiting for a performance. Below them hung other objects, strips of fabric that might have been clothing, tarnished jewelry, and things that looked disturbingly like preserved organs suspended in glass containers. Emily? I called again, my voice cracking despite my efforts to sound calm and professional. Here. I'm here. Her voice came from the largest building, a structure that might have been a church once, judging by its rectangular shape and the rotted remains of what looked like a bell tower. The front door hung open like a mouth, and shadow pooled inside so thick it seemed solid. Every instinct I'd developed in 12 years of wilderness rescue screamed at me to turn around and call for backup. But Annie Morrison's face flashed in my mind again, and I heard her mother's voice asking why I hadn't tried harder, why I hadn't been faster, why I'd let protocol matter more than a child's life. I checked my service weapon, a Glock 22 loaded with .40 caliber rounds, and clicked on my tactical flashlight before approaching the ruined church. The closer I got, the stronger that rotting smell became, mixed with something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The wooden steps creaked under my boots, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside, revealing rows of wooden pews facing a raised platform where an altar might have stood. But instead of a crucifix or religious symbols, something else occupied that space. A table. A metal table stained dark with substances I didn't want to identify, surrounded by surgical instruments that gleamed despite their obvious age. Scalpels, bone saws, clamps, and other tools arranged with the precision of someone who used them regularly, frequently. Emily, where are you? I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. Down here. The voice came from below. My flashlight beam found a trapdoor in the floor beside the altar, standing open to reveal stone steps leading into perfect blackness. The smell rose from down there in waves, rotting flesh, human waste, and something chemical that burned my nostrils. I descended the stairs with my weapon drawn, each step taking me deeper into a nightmare that couldn't be real but was happening anyway. The basement was larger than the building above, carved directly into the bedrock and reinforced with stone archways that belonged in a medieval cathedral. Cells lined the walls, iron bars set into the stone, each one containing occupants. They had been human once. I could tell that much from their general shape and size, but whatever had been done to them in this place had changed them into something else. Their skin hung in loose folds, mottled with colors that shouldn't exist on living tissue. Some had extra limbs growing from their torsos at wrong angles. Others had faces that had been rearranged, into configurations that made my stomach clench with revulsion. "What the hell?" I breathed, raising my weapon toward the nearest cell. "Beautiful, aren't they?" The voice came from behind me, calm and conversational. I spun around to see a man emerging from the shadows at the bottom of the stairs, elderly, maybe 70, wearing what looked like a combination of priest's robes and surgical scrubs stained with decades of use. "Brother Marcus told us you would come," the man continued, smiling with teeth that had been filed to points. "He saw you in the flames 3 nights ago, the guilty ranger, seeking redemption for the little girl he lost. We've been waiting." "Where is Emily Johnson?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady while my hands shook on the Glock's grip. "Oh, she's here. Somewhere. We've been preparing her for the transformation. It's a beautiful process, really. We learned so much during our first incarnation in the 1890s, before those meddling federal marshals drove us underground. But we've had over a century to perfect our techniques." More figures emerged from the shadows. Men and women dressed in similar stained robes, their faces painted or tattooed with symbols that seemed to move and shift in my peripheral vision. One carried a leather bag filled with surgical instruments. Another held a metal chalice that reflected my flashlight beam in impossible patterns. "You're the cult that disappeared," I said, pieces clicking into place in my mind. "The Sanctified Order of Divine Flesh. The federal investigation in 1897 concluded you'd all been killed or scattered." "We simply went deeper," the old man, who must have been their leader, replied with another razor smile. "The forest provided. We learned to take what we needed and leave no traces the authorities would follow. A hiker here, a camper there. Always the isolated ones, the ones who wouldn't be missed immediately." One of the transformed things in the cells reached through the bars toward me with an arm that bent in 3 places where it should have only bent in 1. When it spoke, its voice was Emily's. "Please, please kill me." I aimed my flashlight toward the cell and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing that had been Emily Johnson looked at me with eyes that were still recognizably hers. But the rest, God, the rest was a patchwork of surgical modifications that defied description. Her torso had been opened and rearranged, organs visible through gaps in flesh that had been sewn back together with crude stitching. Additional arms sprouted from her shoulder blades, moving with minds of their own. "We started her transformation yesterday evening," the cult leader said proudly. "Brother Marcus wanted to try a new configuration this time. We're always innovating, you see. Always seeking new ways to honor the divine flesh." The rational part of my mind, the part trained in wilderness survival and crisis management, noted that I was outnumbered at least 6 to 1 in a confined space with limited exits. Standard tactics suggested retreat, calling for backup, establishing a perimeter. But looking at what they'd done to Emily, what they'd done to the others in these cells, I knew that by the time federal agents could organize a response, there would be nothing left to save. And I had already lost one person I was supposed to protect. "Let her go," I said, switching my aim to the cult leader's chest. "Let all of them go, and maybe we can work something out." "I'm afraid that's not possible," he replied, nodding to his followers. "You see, the transformation is irreversible once it's begun. But don't worry, we'll make sure you experience it yourself very soon. We have such wonderful plans for you." The cultists rushed me from 3 directions simultaneously. I put 2 round center mass into the one with the surgical instruments, watching him stumble backward but not fall. His robes fell open to reveal skin covered in scars and metal implants, surgical modifications that had apparently made him resistant to small-caliber gunfire. The woman with the chalice grabbed my gun arm, her grip far stronger than it should have been for someone her size. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth had been removed and replaced with sharpened metal points. Her tongue, when it flicked out toward my face, was forked like a snake's and covered in barbs. I drove my elbow into her solar plexus and felt something give way with a wet cracking sound. But she held on, digging fingernails that had been surgically extended into claws deep into my forearm. Blood ran down my wrist and into my palm, making the Glock's grip slippery. The cult leader produced a syringe from somewhere in his robes and lunged toward my neck. I twisted away but felt the needle graze my jugular as I brought the pistol around in a wide arc, catching him across the temple with the barrel. He went down hard, blood streaming from a gash above his left eye. "Brother Marcus!" one of the others screamed, not in alarm, but in what sounded like religious ecstasy. "The ranger has drawn the sacred blood. The transformation can begin." That's when I realized my mistake. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to capture me, to drag me to that surgical table upstairs and turn me into another one of the things in the cells. The knowledge hit me like ice water in my veins. They had been doing this for over a century, perfecting their techniques, learning from each victim. I emptied the Glocks magazine into the group, not aiming for center mass anymore but for heads, trying to cause enough damage to stop them permanently. The .40 caliber rounds had more effect on unprotected skulls than on whatever surgical reinforcements they'd given their torsos. 3 went down and stayed down, but more emerged from deeper in the basement complex. How many of them were there? "Emily!" I shouted toward her cell while ejecting the empty magazine and slamming in my spare. "Can you still move?" The bars," she gasped in a voice barely recognizable as human. "They don't lock from the inside. Just heavy." I put my shoulder against the cell door and heaved with everything I had. The iron bars swung open with a shriek of protesting hinges, and Emily collapsed into my arms. Her weight was wrong, too heavy, as if the surgical modifications had added significant mass to her body. When I tried to lift her, my hands came away wet with blood and other fluids I didn't want to identify. "Can you walk?" I think so." Together we made it to the stone steps leading back up to the ruined church. Behind us I could hear more cultists emerging from the basement complex, their voices raised in that same melodic chanting I'd heard in the canyon. But now I could make out individual words, and they were describing in precise medical terminology what they planned to do to us when they caught us. The afternoon light streaming through the church's collapsed roof seemed impossibly bright after the basement darkness. Emily leaned heavily against me as we stumbled toward the front door, her breathing rapid and shallow. The surgical modifications to her torso made wet sucking sounds with each breath, as if air was escaping through holes that shouldn't exist. "The trail," I said, supporting her weight while scanning the ruined settlement for threats. "Do you remember how you got here?" They carried me," she whispered. "But I saw the canyon entrance. It's not on any map because they've been hiding it, camouflaging it. We made it across the settlement's central area, past those horrible twisted crosses with their decorations of human remains. Each skull seemed to track our movement with empty sockets, and I had to force myself not to look directly at them. Some appeared fresh, possibly hikers who had disappeared in recent months, while others were old enough to be yellowed with age. The canyon exit appeared ahead of us, a narrow passage between basalt cliffs that I was certain hadn't been visible when I'd entered. Emily was right. They had been hiding this place, using some method to camouflage the entrance that made it effectively invisible from the main trail system. "There," Emily pointed with one of her original arms toward a barely visible gap in the rock face. "That's how they brought me in." We squeezed through the passage, Emily crying out in pain as the rough stone scraped against her surgical wounds. I could hear the cultists behind us now, their chanting growing louder as they pursued us through their hidden settlement. But something was wrong with the sounds. The voices seemed to be coming from above us as well as behind, as if some of them had climbed the canyon walls. The passage opened onto familiar forest, the Sol Duke Trail visible about 100 yards through the Douglas firs. My radio crackled with static as we emerged from whatever interference had been blocking transmissions from the canyon. "Station 7 to base," I gasped into the handset. "Officer needs assistance. Sol Duke Trail, grid reference 47.8156 north, 123.8342 west. Multiple suspects, officer wounded, civilian wounded. Request immediate backup and medical support." "Station 7, this is base. Are you injured? What's your status?" Before I could respond, Emily screamed. One of the cultists had emerged from the rock passage behind us, a woman whose face had been surgically altered to include additional eyes arranged in a circle around her forehead. She carried what looked like a cattle prod modified with surgical instruments, sparks dancing between metal contacts. I put 3 rounds into her center mass, and this time they had the desired effect. She went down hard and didn't get back up, but I could see more shapes moving in the passage, more of them coming. "Emily, can you make it to the main trail?" I asked, helping her toward the tree line. "I think, yes." We stumbled through the underbrush toward the trail, Emily's modified body leaving a trail of blood and other fluids that would be easy to follow. But at least we were out of that hidden canyon, back in mapped territory where backup could find us. My GPS unit showed our location clearly now, and I could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the direction of the ranger station. The cultists emerged from their hidden passage like insects swarming from a disturbed nest. There had to be 20 or 30 of them, all bearing the surgical modifications that marked them as members of the sanctified order of divine flesh. Some walked upright, others moved on all fours with limbs that had been rearranged into animal configurations. A few had wings, actual functional wings grafted onto human torsos, and took to the air with ungainly flapping motions. But they stopped at the tree line. I realized they weren't pursuing us anymore, just standing at the edge of their hidden territory like they'd hit an invisible barrier. The ones with wings settled back to earth. The ones who had been charging on modified legs came to a halt. "They can't leave," Emily whispered, understanding dawning in her voice. "Whatever they did to themselves, it binds them to that place. They can't leave the canyon." The helicopter appeared overhead, a Park Service Eurocopter AS-350 with medical personnel aboard. Within minutes, Emily was on a stretcher being loaded into the aircraft, while I provided a preliminary report to the backup rangers who'd arrived by ground vehicle. "Sir?" Ranger Patricia Valdez said after I'd finished describing the hidden settlement. "We need to call in federal authorities. This is way beyond our jurisdiction." "Already done," I replied, watching the helicopter disappear toward the regional medical center in Port Angeles. "But I want a perimeter established around that canyon entrance before anyone else goes in there. Those things, they're not human anymore. Not entirely." The federal response team arrived within 6 hours. FBI hostage rescue team members with military support, and enough firepower to level a small town. They found the hidden canyon exactly where I'd indicated, but when they breached the camouflaged entrance, they discovered something impossible. The settlement was empty, completely empty, as if no one had occupied it for decades. The basement cells were there, along with the surgical equipment and the twisted crosses, but no cultists, no bodies, no evidence that anyone had been living there recently except for Emily's blood on the stone floors. "It's like they just vanished," FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres told me during the debriefing 3 days later. "But the forensic evidence supports your account. We found DNA from at least 15 different individuals in that basement, including Miss Johnson's, and the surgical equipment shows recent use." "What about Emily?" I asked. "Is she—" "She's alive. The surgeons at Harborview Medical Center have been working around the clock to undo what was done to her. It's going to take multiple operations, but they think they can restore her to something approaching normal. The psychological trauma is another matter entirely." Emily Johnson spent 8 months in various hospitals, undergoing surgical procedures to remove or repair the modifications the cult had inflicted on her. The doctors managed to save her original limbs and remove most of the foreign tissue that had been grafted onto her body. She would never be entirely the same, but she was alive. She was human, and she was whole in the ways that mattered most. The federal investigation into the sanctified order of divine flesh concluded that the cult had indeed survived their supposed eradication in 1897, operating in secret for over a century, while perfecting their surgical techniques on kidnapped victims. The working theory was that they had escape tunnels or hidden chambers deeper in the canyon system, and had simply retreated to even more remote locations when their settlement was discovered. But I think Emily was right. I think whatever they did to themselves, whatever bargain they made with whatever dark forces they served, bound them to that place in ways that transcended normal physical limitations. They couldn't leave because they had sacrificed their humanity for power, and that power came with a price. The canyon entrance was permanently sealed with concrete and steel, and the area was designated as a hazardous site off-limits to civilian access. Warning signs were posted along all the nearby trails, and ranger patrols were increased throughout the Salt Duke region. I received a commendation from the Department of the Interior for my actions in rescuing Emily Johnson. But more importantly, I could finally look at myself in the mirror again without seeing Annie Morrison's accusing face. I had failed one little girl through hesitation and protocol, but I had saved another through decisive action and personal risk. It didn't erase my guilt entirely, but it gave me something to balance against it. What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. 6 months later, Carol and Richard Johnson visited me at the ranger station. Emily was with them, walking under her own power, looking healthy and normal except for the surgical scars that would never completely fade. She thanked me for not giving up on her, for risking my life to pull her out of that nightmare. "I keep thinking about the others," she said quietly. "The ones in the cells who didn't make it out. Do you think they're still down there somewhere?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know that you're here, you're alive, and you're free. Sometimes that has to be enough." Emily nodded, understanding in a way that only someone who had survived genuine horror could understand. We stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the forest that had nearly claimed both our lives but had ultimately allowed us to find redemption in each other's survival. The Olympic Peninsula is still one of the most beautiful places on Earth, filled with ancient trees and pristine wilderness that speaks to something deep in the human soul. But I know now that beauty and horror can coexist in the same space, separated only by hidden canyon walls, and the choices we make when confronted with impossible situations. I still patrol these forests every day, and I sleep soundly at night knowing that I kept my promise to never lose another person under my protection. Emily Johnson is alive and healing, and sometimes in this job, that's the only victory that matters. That's my story, and I'm still not sure I made all the right choices. What do you think? Would you have acted differently? Share your thoughts below and subscribe if you want more supernatural stories from the forest. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 23 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these ancient woods could throw at me. Missing hikers, bear attacks, flash floods, hypothermia cases. I handled them all with the calm efficiency that comes from 2 decades of experience. The other rangers called me Steady Mitchell because nothing rattled me. Nothing. Until October 15th, 2008, when I found Emma Phillips's backpack embedded inside a Douglas fir that had been growing for over 60 years. I should have known something was wrong when my radio started crackling with static at 06:30 hours that morning. I was conducting my routine patrol along the Hoh River Trail when dispatch broke through the interference. "Ranger Mitchell, this is base. We have a code yellow. Missing hiker reported at Salt Duke. Family called it in 20 minutes ago. Victim is Emma Phillips, age 22, last seen yesterday afternoon on the Upper Salt Duke Trail. You're closest to the area." I keyed my radio, feeling the familiar weight of my duty belt against my hips. "Copy that, base. ETA to trailhead approximately 30 minutes. Any additional details?" The static intensified, nearly drowning out the dispatcher's voice. Phillips was hiking alone. Camping gear. Expected back yesterday evening. Family drove up from Seattle when she didn't. The transmission cut to white noise. I tried several more attempts to raise base, but got nothing except an electronic shrieking that made my teeth ache. 23 years, and I'd never heard my radio make sounds like that. I adjusted my pack, 42 pounds of search and rescue equipment including GPS unit, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, and 3 days of rations, and headed toward the Salt Duke area. The October morning was crisp, temperature around 38 degrees with fog threading between the massive trunks of cedar and fir trees that had stood here since before the first European settlers arrived. The scent of decomposing leaves mixed with the clean smell of morning dew created the familiar perfume of the Olympic rainforest. Steller's jays called from the canopy above, their harsh cries echoing off the moss-covered bark. Everything seemed normal, but something felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. After 23 years in these woods, you develop an instinct for when the forest is trying to tell you something. I reached the Upper Solduke trailhead at 07 p.m. hours and immediately began standard search protocol. Emma's car, a blue Honda Civic, sat alone in the parking area with a Washington State University parking pass dangling from the rearview mirror. I noted the license plate number and began my preliminary examination of the vehicle. Doors unlocked, keys on the driver's seat, purse still inside. No sign of struggle or disturbance. The trail register showed Emma Phillips had signed in at 14:30 hours the previous day, indicating her intended destination as the Seven Lakes Basin area, a moderate day hike that should have had her back before dark. I started up the trail, looking for any sign of her passage. The first mile yielded nothing unusual. Boot prints in the mud matched the Merrill hiking boots described by her family, size 7, with a distinctive wave pattern sole. The prints followed the established trail with normal spacing, no indication of running or distress. At mile marker 1.2, I found her first piece of gear, a blue bandana tied around a branch at eye level, standard trail marking behavior. Hikers often left small items to mark their route, especially when venturing off established trails. The bandana was dry despite the morning dew, which meant it had been placed recently, likely yesterday afternoon. I photographed it with my digital camera, noted the GPS coordinates, 479025 degren, 123.8347 degw, and continued following her track. That's when things started getting strange. At mile 1, Emma's boot prints veered off the main trail toward a deer path that led deeper into old-growth forest. The prints were still normal, steady pace, no signs of being chased or running. But the forest around this area felt different. The air grew colder despite climbing elevation should have been minimal. The usual forest sounds, squirrel chatter, bird calls, rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, had stopped completely. I followed the deer path for another half mile before I saw it. 20 feet ahead, embedded in the trunk of a massive Douglas fir, was Emma Phillips's backpack, not hanging from a branch, not sitting at the base of the tree, embedded in the trunk itself, as if the tree had grown around it over decades. The red osprey pack was partially visible, with shoulder straps and the top compartment emerging from the bark like some impossible growth. Moss covered the exposed portions, and small ferns had taken root in the fabric. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like I couldn't pull enough air into my lungs. My shoulders crept up until they nearly touched my ears, and my peripheral vision seemed to narrow, as if I was looking through a tunnel. In 23 years of search and rescue, I had never seen anything that violated the basic laws of physics. I approached the tree slowly, my hands trembling despite 15 years of rock-steady nerves during emergency situations. The Douglas fir was easily 60 years old, maybe older. Its trunk was over 4 feet in diameter, with bark patterns that told the story of decades of growth. This tree had been here since before Emma Phillips was born, yet somehow her backpack was growing out of it like it had always been there. I tried my radio again. "Base, this is Mitchell. I've got a situation at coordinates 47.8934 dgn, 123.8521 degree W. Need to speak with a supervisor immediately." Static filled my earpiece, but underneath the electronic noise I could swear I heard something else. A sound like whispers, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Words that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly inside my skull. I reached out to touch the backpack, and my fingers went numb the moment they made contact. The fabric was warm, which was impossible. The morning air was still well below 40 degrees, and anything that had been outside overnight should have been cold to the touch. Instead, the pack felt like it had been sitting in the sun. As I examined the impossible fusion of tree and fabric, something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun around, hand automatically going to the bear spray on my belt, but saw nothing except the same moss-covered trees and filtered sunlight that had been there moments before. Still, I had the distinct impression of being watched by something that had been studying me for far longer than I'd been aware of it. The whispers in my radio static grew louder, and I realized I was beginning to understand individual words. This should have been impossible. The sounds weren't in English, weren't in any European language I'd ever heard. They had the rhythm and tonal quality of native languages, the kind of words that had been spoken in these forests for thousands of years before the first European explorers arrived. "He sees," the whispers seemed to say. "The blood awakens." My knees went weak, and I had to grab a nearby cedar trunk for support. The bark felt wrong under my palm. Too warm, too soft, almost like skin. I jerked my hand away and noticed that my fingertips had left impressions in what should have been solid wood. This was when I should have called for backup. Should have returned to base and filed a report that would have probably gotten me a psychological evaluation. Instead, something deep in my mind, something I'd never been aware of before this moment, urged me to keep searching. It felt like a part of myself that had been sleeping for 43 years was finally waking up. I continued following the deer path, documenting each impossible discovery with photographs and GPS coordinates that I hoped someone would eventually believe. Emma's water bottle, half full and still cold, sitting balanced on a branch 30 feet off the ground with no way for a human to have placed it there. Her hiking boots, still tied, emerging from the base of a western red cedar like they'd been there for decades. A sock dangling from a spider web that would have taken weeks to construct. What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. Each discovery made less sense than the last, but the whispers in my radio were growing clearer, and part of my mind was starting to understand them. The voice spoke of ancient hungers, of blood ceremonies that had been performed in these woods before the European diseases decimated the coastal tribes. It told stories of a creature that had fed on the spiritual energy of humans for over 1,000 years, growing stronger with each generation. "She feeds us well," the voice whispered. "But you carry the old blood. You can see between the worlds." I found Emma Phillips at 13:47 hours, 3 miles from where any human should have been able to travel in the time available. She was sitting cross-legged in a grove of ancient cedars, her back straight, eyes closed, perfectly motionless. At first glance, she appeared to be meditating, but as I got closer, I realized she wasn't breathing. Yet she wasn't dead. Her skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like expensive candle wax held up to firelight. Veins were visible as dark tracery beneath her skin, but no blood moved through them. Her lips were blue-black, but when I checked for a pulse at her throat, I could feel a slow, rhythmic thrumming that was far too slow to sustain human life. She opened her eyes as my fingers touched her neck. They were completely black. Not just the pupils. The entire visible eye was a glossy, liquid black that reflected my face like dark water. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth had elongated into sharp, pointed fangs. "Hello, Ryan," she said in a voice that harmonized with itself, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "We've been waiting for you." This was the moment when my old life ended and something else began. I should have been terrified. Every rational part of my mind screamed that this was impossible, that Emma Phillips was dead or dying, that I should call for medical evacuation immediately. Instead, the newly awakened part of my consciousness recognized what I was seeing. This wasn't Emma Phillips anymore. Something ancient and hungry had taken residence in her body, using her form as a vessel for its own purposes. More importantly, I understood that I could see this truth because I carried the old blood, a genetic inheritance from ancestors who had lived in these lands and dealt with creatures like this for generations before European contact changed everything. "What are you?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The thing wearing Emma's face tilted its head with bird-like curiosity. "We are what your people called the blooddrinkers, though we are far more than your European vampire legends suggest. We are older than your civilization, older than the trees that surround us. We feed on the life essence of humans, but we do not simply kill, we transform. And Emma sleeps within us, dreams our dreams, sees through our eyes. She is becoming something new, just as you are beginning to remember something old." As it spoke, I became aware of changes in my own perception. The forest around us was revealing layers of reality I'd never seen before. Spiritual echoes moved between the trees. translucent figures of people who had walked these paths centuries ago. The very air shimmered with energy that seemed to flow between all living things, connecting every plant, animal, and insect in a vast web of life. The creature stood with impossible grace, Emma's body moving in ways that human joints shouldn't allow. Your ancestors knew us, feared us, but also worked with us when necessary. The coastal tribes understood that some hungers must be fed to maintain the balance between worlds. What do you want from me? We want you to choose. You can report this incident through normal channels. File paperwork describing a missing hiker who died of exposure or wild animal attack. Let the bureaucracy handle the details while we retreat deeper into the wilderness to feed again when the hunger rises. The creature circled me slowly, Emma's face showing expressions that were predatory and ancient. Or you can acknowledge what you are becoming. Accept the abilities that your bloodline carries. Learn to see between the worlds and serve as a bridge between your people and ours. I understood with sudden clarity that this was why Emma's belongings had been placed in impossible locations. The creature had been testing me, seeing if I carried the genetic markers necessary to perceive supernatural phenomena. The impossibilities were a kind of examination, and I had passed. If I agree to work with you, I said carefully, what happens to Emma? She becomes our first gift to you, fully restored with memories of this experience but no lasting harm. Consider her a demonstration of good faith. And if I refuse? The creature's smile revealed even more elongated fangs. Then she feeds us through the winter months and we find another with the old blood to make this offer to. There are others in your family line, Ryan Mitchell. Cousins, nephews, great-grandchildren. We are patient. The choice was terrible and obvious at the same time. I could save Emma's life and potentially prevent future disappearances by accepting a role I didn't understand, or I could maintain my denial and let an innocent woman die for it. But there was a third option, one that the newly awakened part of my mind recognized with startling clarity. There's another way, I said. You're hungry because you've been isolated from the spiritual practices that used to sustain you. The coastal tribes aren't gone. They're still here. Still practicing ceremonies, still maintaining connections to the spirit world. You don't need to hunt humans if you can find a way back to the old partnerships. The creature stopped circling and stared at me with Emma's black eyes. You would broker a meeting between us and the tribal authorities? I would facilitate a conversation between beings who share a history in this land. But Emma goes free first, and there are no more disappearances until we can establish a sustainable arrangement. For several moments, the only sound was wind moving through the cedar boughs high above us. Then the creature began to laugh, a sound that harmonized with itself in impossible ways. Your great-grandfather would be proud, it said. He made a similar offer in 1932, during the last time we attempted to work with your people's authorities. But you are stronger than he was. You see more clearly. The creature knelt beside Emma's motionless form and placed one pale hand over her heart. Dark energy flowed between them, and Emma's skin gradually returned to normal human coloration. Her breathing resumed in slow, natural rhythm, and the terrible black drained from her eyes like ink dissolving in clear water. She will sleep naturally now, the creature said. And I realized its voice had changed from Emma's harmonized tones to something deeper and more resonant. When she wakes, she will remember being lost in the woods and being found by a competent ranger who guided her to safety. And you? We will wait for word of your negotiations. The Quinault and Maka peoples have shamans who still remember the old agreements. Speak with them. Arrange a meeting in a place of power. The hot springs at Solduc would be appropriate. We will sense when the time is right. The creature's form began to blur and shift, becoming less solid with each passing second. But remember, Ryan Mitchell, you are changed now. The old blood is awakened. You will see things others cannot see, sense presences others cannot sense. This gift comes with responsibilities. What kind of responsibilities? You are now a guardian of the boundary between worlds. Other creatures will seek you out, recognizing what you have become. Some will ask for help crossing into your world. Others will need to be prevented from crossing. You must learn to distinguish between them. The creature faded completely, leaving me alone with the unconscious Emma Phillips in a grove that now looked completely normal. The spiritual echoes were gone. The shimmering energy between living things had faded, and my radio was functioning normally again. But I could still feel the change inside me, like a door had been opened in my mind that could never be completely closed again. I carried Emma to the main trail and radioed for medical evacuation, reporting that I'd found her suffering from exposure and dehydration, but in stable condition. The helicopter arrived within 30 minutes, and Emma was transported to Olympic Medical Center for observation. She recovered completely, with no memory of anything beyond getting lost on an unfamiliar deer path and feeling increasingly disoriented until she sat down to rest and apparently fell asleep. The official report documented a successful search and rescue operation with positive outcome for the victim. But that was only the beginning of my real education. Over the following weeks, I made discreet contact with tribal authorities, approaching the subject carefully and with appropriate respect for cultural protocols. To my surprise, several shamans and tribal elders were willing to discuss historical relationships between their peoples and various spiritual entities that inhabited the Olympic Peninsula. The conversations led to a carefully arranged meeting at the Sol Duke Hot Springs during the new moon of November. I won't detail everything that was discussed or agreed upon, but I can say that arrangements were made that satisfied both the ancient creatures' hunger and the tribal authorities' responsibility to protect their people's spiritual traditions. Emma Phillips never experienced another supernatural encounter as far as I know. She graduated from Washington State University with a degree in environmental science and now works for the Forest Service in Montana. Sometimes she sends Christmas cards. As for me, I learned to live with my expanded perception of reality. The creature was right about others seeking me out. Over the years since 2008, I've encountered dozens of entities that exist in the spaces between our world and others. Some I helped cross over. Others I prevented from crossing. A few became what I can only describe as business partners in maintaining the delicate balance between worlds. I'm still a forest ranger, still handling the normal duties of wilderness protection and public safety. But I also serve as an unofficial liaison between human authorities and the older inhabitants of these ancient forests. It's not a role I ever expected to take on, but I've discovered that I have both the temperament and the inherited abilities necessary to do it effectively. The most important thing I learned is that the supernatural world isn't separate from the natural world. They're the same thing, viewed from different angles. Once you develop the ability to see both perspectives simultaneously, the apparently impossible becomes simply unusual. I still patrol the same trails, still respond to search and rescue calls, still file the same paperwork. But now I also serve as a bridge between worlds that have been forced apart for too long. It's challenging work, but it's also the most meaningful thing I've ever done. And I'm definitely not the same person who found that impossible backpack embedded in a 60-year-old Douglas fir. I'm someone much more capable, much more aware, and much more useful to both the human and supernatural communities that call the Olympic Peninsula home. That's my story. And I'm still not sure I made all the right choices, but I know I made the necessary ones. What do you think? Would you have acted differently? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more supernatural stories from the forest.